The first thing Carolyn noticed was the smell. It came from the cellar, a thick, sweet rot that clung to the back of her throat like something alive. She told herself it was the house. Old houses smell. The farmhouse on Round Top Road had been standing since 1736, after all. Nearly 2.5 centuries of wood soaking up rain and silence. But this smell moved. It drifted through the kitchen at 3 in the morning. It pooled in the hallway outside the girls' bedrooms, and some nights, standing alone at the top of the stairs, Carolyn swore she could feel it breathing. It was January 1971. The Perron family had been in the house for less than a week. Roger and Carolyn and their 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April. They had come looking for space, for quiet, for the kind of life you build in the countryside of Harrisville, Rhode Island. What they found instead was something that had been waiting. The house sat on 200 acres of farmland in the village of Harrisville, in the northwest corner of Rhode Island. Locals called it the Old Arnold Estate. It had been built before the American Revolution, and over the centuries, 8 generations of families had lived and died within its walls. The Perrons bought it for the land, the charm, the 10 rooms that could swallow a family of 7 and still leave space for secrets. At first, it was everything they wanted. The girls ran through the fields, Roger repaired fences, Carolyn planted a garden. But the house had its own rhythms. Doors that had been closed would be open when they came downstairs in the morning. Chairs moved across rooms overnight, leaving scratches on the hardwood floors that no one could explain. And then there were the sounds. A soft, rhythmic tapping from inside the walls, always starting after midnight, always stopping the moment someone pressed their ear to the plaster. The girls began to whisper about a woman they saw standing at the foot of their beds. She wore a gray dress. She never spoke. She just stood there, watching, her head tilted slightly to one side, as if she were listening to something none of them could hear. And every time they blinked, she was gone. It started small. A broom leaning against a wall would fall at the exact moment someone entered the room. Blankets would be pulled slowly off sleeping children in the middle of the night, not yanked, but pulled, gently, deliberately, as though something wanted them to wake up and see. Cindy, the youngest at the time, told her mother that someone kept tugging her hair while she slept. When Carolyn checked, there was no one there. But there were marks, small red welts on the girl's scalp, as if fingers had gripped and twisted. Then the temperature drops began. Rooms would plunge from comfortable to freezing in seconds. Not the whole house, just one room at a time, as if something cold were moving through the building, lingering in doorways, hovering beside beds. Carolyn began to feel it most intensely in the cellar. She would go down to do laundry, and the air would thicken around her, pressing against her skin like wet cloth. The smell was worst there, that sweet, rotting sweetness that made her gag. And one morning, standing at the bottom of the cellar stairs, she looked up and saw a dark stain spreading across the stone wall. It hadn't been there the day before. It was the shape of a hand, fingers splayed wide, pressed flat against the rock as if someone on the other side were trying to push through. By 1973, Carolyn had had enough. She reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most well-known paranormal investigators in New England. Ed was a self-taught demonologist. Lorraine claimed to be a clairvoyant, someone who could sense presences that others could not. They had investigated dozens of cases by then, from poltergeists in Connecticut to demonic hauntings in Long Island. When the Warrens arrived at the farmhouse, Lorraine walked through the front door and stopped. She later said the darkness in that house was unlike anything she had ever felt. It wasn't just cold, it was hostile. Something in that house did not want them there. The Warrens spent weeks investigating. They brought recording equipment, cameras, other researchers. They documented temperature anomalies, unexplained sounds, and objects that moved when no one was near them. But it was Lorraine's readings that were most disturbing. She said the house was not haunted by one spirit. It was haunted by many, generations of the dead who had never left. And at the center of it all, she sensed something older and darker, a presence that predated the house itself, something tied to the land, to the soil, to the very ground the foundation sat upon. The Warrens believed this presence had a name. They traced it back through local history, through church records and property deeds, through whispered stories that the people of Harrisville had been telling for over a century. The night of the seance, the house was silent. Ed and Lorraine had gathered a small group in the main room. Researchers, a medium, and Carolyn, who had insisted on being present despite Ed's objections. The candles flickered. The medium began to speak, and then Carolyn's chair lifted off the floor. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately, as if invisible hands were raising it from beneath. She was tilted backward, suspended, her eyes rolling back in her head. When she opened her mouth, the voice that came out was not hers. It was lower, older, speaking in a language no one in the room recognized. Roger Perron burst through the door. He had been outside, pacing, unwilling to participate. When he saw his wife suspended in the air, he grabbed her and pulled her free. The chair crashed to the ground. Carolyn collapsed. Roger turned to Ed Warren and told him to get out. The Warrens left that night, but the presence in the house did not. If anything, it grew worse. The girls reported seeing the woman in gray more frequently, not just at night now, but during the day, standing in corners, watching from windows, her face always in shadow. Carolyn began waking with bruises she could not explain, long, dark marks on her arms and legs, as if something had been gripping her while she slept, and the smell in the cellar became constant. The name the Warrens uncovered was Bathsheba Sherman. Born in 1812, she had lived on the neighboring farm and died in 1885 at the age of 73. The local legend, whispered but never written down, claimed that Bathsheba had been accused of practicing dark rituals, that an infant in her care had been found dead, a knitting needle driven into the base of its skull, that no charges were ever filed because no one could prove it, that she cursed the land and everyone who would ever live upon it. The historical record tells a different story. Bathsheba was a member of the local Baptist church. Her minister presided over her funeral. No court documents, no newspaper articles, no official records of any kind link her to witchcraft or murder. She was, by all accounts, an ordinary woman who lived an ordinary life on a Rhode Island farm. But something haunted that house. The Perron family lived with it for 9 years. 9 years of sleepless nights, of doors slamming in empty rooms, of a woman in gray who appeared and vanished like smoke. 9 years of cold spots and strange smells, and the feeling, always the feeling, of being watched by something that should not exist. The Perrons finally left the house in 1980. They said the moment they crossed the property line for the last time, the feeling stopped, like walking out of a room where something terrible had happened and closing the door behind you. The house still stands on Round Top Road. Other families have lived there since. Some reported nothing unusual. Others refused to stay more than a few months. Andrea Perron, the eldest daughter, wrote 3 books about what happened to her family. She has never recanted. She has never said it was a hoax or a misunderstanding or the product of old pipes and overactive imaginations. She says what she experienced in that house was real, and here is what remains unexplained, what no investigator, no skeptic, no historian has ever been able to answer. If nothing happened in that house, why did an entire family endure 9 years of terror before fleeing? What were the marks on Carolyn's body? What moved the chairs? What made the walls bleed with that dark, spreading stain? And who was the woman in gray? Because someone was standing in that house, and she is still there.